Our text message today is titled Better Questions Lead to Better Answers. So I want to ask you, can I ask a revealing question? Are you a glass half full or a glass half empty person? The answer, I suspect, can depend on your perspective and the direction that you're headed. Are you drinking the glass? It's probably half empty then. Are you filling the glass? It's probably half full then. Maybe the question requires more context to answer accurately. We might need to know more than just that simple question. Maybe when I ask the question, there are engineers or English teachers or those out there with sharp wits who might be one of those people who thought, Pastor, technically the glass is full, half water and half air, but it's full. Maybe you even already answered that question that way in the past. And maybe you've chuckled in satisfaction as people replied and face-palmed, nobody likes a literalist. You're supposed to be laughing. Maybe you are. I would be. I probably am one who have said that in the past. Anyway, Moat, the Sahik, that is spiritual person. So that's Moat, the Sahik of the Omatikaya clan of the Navi people, wisely said, it is hard to fill a cup that is already full. Yes, I just made a serious Avatar, obscure but serious Avatar reference in my homily. Remember that movie, that like legendary, groundbreaking 3D CGI movie Avatar? Well, I bet maybe you didn't know that there are actually a lot of Jewish references in regard to the faith and spirituality of the Navi people in that movie. Actually, Sahik is one letter off from Sadiq, which is the Hebrew word for a righteous person. And Ewa, the name of their God, you can rearrange the letters to make it into Yahweh, which is basically Yahweh. And Navi is a Hebrew word for prophet. Now, all of this according to the internet. I honestly didn't do that deep of a dive to make sure that that information was correct. Don't crucify me, please, if it's not. But it was a pretty cool little anecdote. So I thought all that just to lead the way to say, you know, this phrase, this, it is hard to fill a cup that is already full, is really a Zen Buddhist proverb. And honestly, it isn't far from Jesus' own caution about putting new wine in old wineskins. So what does the phrase mean? It's hard to fill a cup that's already full. I've said that to people and they just look at me in confused ways. But basically, it means that it's hard to teach somebody who already knows everything. You know, like a teenager or a conspiracy theorist. And it seems like we have a couple of cup-full people in our stories today. Remember how I said answers to questions are often informed by your perspective and your direction of travel? Well, I suggest that maybe the lawyer and Martha seem to have the perspective that they are already doing what's right. The lawyer, who stood up to Jesus, quote, stood up to Jesus, quote, wanting to justify himself. That language sort of gives us an indication that and if you look in the original Hebrew, the stood up to test Jesus really means that he kind of got up in his face and then wanted to justify himself. Gives us the indication that he kind of is asking, in a way, rhetorically, what he must do. And Martha Poor Martha was focused so much on feeling overwhelmed. I think it was just like this thing right in front of her face that she couldn't see beyond being overwhelmed, and then presumed that Jesus didn't care as he was allowing her sister to um, seemingly shirk her duties to sit at his feet and listen. They kind of seem to be people asking questions that they already know the answers to. You might suggest that they are then full cups, not really ready to learn, but they're full cups that already know everything. And so when they ask, it's going to be difficult to give them any new information. And it's not necessarily that they're wrong, right? Jesus doesn't actually condemn either one of them. He doesn't actually say that Martha is wrong for doing what she's doing, or that the work that she's doing isn't necessary, just that she's overwhelmed with it and neglecting something else. And the lawyer doesn't get condemned. Actually, Jesus says, "You have said what is right," and then tells him to go and do that. But in the story, I think, in both stories, I think Jesus encourages finding better answers by asking better questions. For instance, did you notice that Jesus doesn't actually answer the question, "Don't you care how much work I have to do?" Martha was really focused on how much work she had to do and really focused on the fact that Mary wasn't helping her. And so Martha is asking with the assumption that helping around the house is already the right answer. That she's asking the question knowing that the right thing for Mary to be doing is to be helping her. Similarly, Jesus doesn't actually answer the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Did you catch that? Wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked him, "Who is my neighbor?" You see, the lawyer is asking with the assumption that the Hebrew people is already the right answer. He has this lineage and this culture and this heritage and this religion. It's all tangled up and tied up together. And sort of he's testing Jesus by asking a rhetorical question that has an assumed and already understood answer. The Hebrew people are my neighbor. But who is my neighbor isn't actually the important question. So, did you catch that? Jesus actually answers a different question. What he answers is, how can I love my neighbor? How can I love my neighbor is a better question. And Jesus answers that one so clearly, so beautifully, doesn't he? How can I love my neighbor? Well, if we're going to present that as the question, I guess we have to answer it, right? Except that I know that many of you already know some good answers to that question. How can I love my neighbor? Well, we've loved our neighbors, haven't we? Through free community meals and the fellowship that goes along with that. We've loved our neighbors through sharing tables and clothing swaps and reaching out to groups outside of our group and reaching out to those who are struggling. We've got kind of a history of that, even though quarantine has made it difficult to live up to that ideal of ours. And there are more good answers out there too. If you've been following up and watching the news stories coming out of, what's going on with the winter crisis down in Texas, there's a Texas furniture store owner who he's sort of big in media. I think he dresses up as a mattress on his commercials to get attention. But this guy opened up all of his furniture stores for people to come in and sleep on the mattresses and sit on the couches and watch football games on TV and basically come in and get warm and settle down because their homes aren't comfortable and safe places anymore. And I just saw a story today. My sister-in-law and her husband both work for Ford Corporation. And I guess Ford Corporation now is encouraging all of the dealerships down in Texas who have trucks with generators installed in them to loan those trucks out to provide much needed electricity. We also know that locally we have a wonderful organization to help the homeless in our area have mercy. They have a shelter and they have a kitchen and they have just so many ways that they help people. And then out at Barry's house, they have um, food and clothing pantries, and they provide lunches once a week, and you can come in and they have a food truck that comes in. So there are lots of ways that people are being like that Good Samaritan, that people are actually coming up with good answers for the question, how can I love my neighbor? And so I encourage us, and I know that we've been wrestling with this question in the context of finding good answers in this unique season of struggle, in this unique season of quarantine and pandemic. And so that question can open up other good questions too, can it? We can start to ask, who are the people who have fallen to robbers in our community today? Identifying those people will help us to know what we need to do in order to love our neighbors. And then we can ask, what resources do we have to tap into amongst our people? What resources do we have in our community? What resources are we aware of that people can have that maybe we can call in and recruit and encourage? And then we need to ask too, what resources are needed? What's the need out there? What are people needing? And then really great is we could create this Venn diagram sort of where the resources that we have to tap into overlap with the resources that are needed, and then we really know really the best way that we can love our neighbors. And here at the Table Faith Community, I think we need to look into new ways that we, as a faith community today, how can we also follow Jesus' instructions to go and do likewise? It's something that Jesus calls us to do. Go therefore and do likewise. And so we need to sit down and have some conversations and look at our resources and look at what the need is and look at the circumstances and find out ways that we can follow Jesus' call to love our neighbor. May the Spirit help us to do so. Amen.